Not entirely sure. I think we got to page 40 something. I know we talked about the two Bethlehems, and 42, I think we started talking about spit and Bible inspiration. Do we talk about that much? I can't remember what I've read and what we've gone over in class. Well, I know we talked about the two Bethlehems, so we'll just rehash a little bit.
I don't remember the spit.
The spit.
I don't think we got into that.
Well, I think I didn't plan to spend a whole lot of time on this, just because I think it's a little bit thin. Hopefully it is.
Hey, Chris, may I interrupt you?
Yeah, go
Make
ahead.
an editorial comment.
Sure.
I appreciate your saying that. This brother has done a great job, and we're thankful this book's written, and there's great value in it.
Mm-hmm.
But hopefully by reading it, it's teaching us to do exactly what you're doing, and hopefully some of us have been doing, maybe to a fault.
Mm-hmm.
And that is to be critical thinkers. You don't want to just accept something hook, line, and sinker just because even a well-meaning, well-respected brother wrote it. You want to examine it, and if the argument's not really strong or probably wouldn't be persuasive for an unbeliever, it's better quietly, just privily to put her aside, without making a big deal about that argument.
Exactly.
In other words, I don't mind you saying, I hope I haven't gone too far in encouraging some of that, because I don't want to be a bonehead and make it look like I'm against all. There's a great deal of good material in here, but every once in a while an argument can be made to where you can say, well, if the skeptic doesn't, for example, the next point, if the skeptic doesn't accept the fact Jesus is the incarnate Son of God already,
Mm-hmm.
he's not going to be persuaded there's a detailed prediction about his getting a body prepared to be the incarnate Son of God.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's certain premises have to come logically prior, and you establish those conclusions before you move to the next. So I appreciate what you're saying. I know why you're saying it.
Well, I think that it's this book is a good reference. There's a lot of good reference material here, but I don't think that it is necessarily a step-by-step guide to converting somebody or talking specifically about in the proper order the proofs that we might have. And I think it's interesting. He goes on page 39 to 40. I mean, there was dozens of verses that we talked about. Where we talked about the prophecy and it coming to pass. And they're all given in one paragraph, one gigantic paragraph here, just one after the other. These verses, comma, these verses, comma, these verses. And then, several pages are then given to, the spit argument, which, I guess, again, it's not the worst argument in the world, but, it doesn't necessarily hold a lot of water. I just keep going back to your... I keep going back to Jesse's mode of thinking. But we'll continue on. Spit and Bible inspiration. He says, another marvelous messianic prophecy was articulated centuries before Jesus Christ arrived on the planet by the prophet Isaiah, who described his coming in detail. In a strongly messianic section of his oracles, Isaiah described the mistreatment the Christ would endure at the hands of his enemies. Isaiah 50 and verse 6 we have on the board here. Got to remember to transition. This describes the mistreatment Christ would endure at the hands of his enemies. I gave my back to those who struck me, and my cheeks to those who plucked out the beard. I did not hide my face from shame and spitting. Okay? So observe the specificity of this prophetic utterance, which actually contains several prophetic details. Among other things, the prophecy predicted Jesus would endure a physical ordeal that included being spit upon. Such a bold, forthright allusion is certainly daring if the predictor is merely guessing. I don't know how bold that is. I mean, that's just my thinking. How bold would it be to say that someone was going to get spit on? I mean,
Well, why would you spit upon somebody? It would normally be to show disdain or disrespect.
Sure.
And how uncommon in history has that been? That's another question. Has that been so uncommon it never happened?
I think it happened quite a lot. I mean, I think
Well,
that
it still happens today.
sure. I did that. I got mad at my cousin when I was probably a teenager, maybe, or preteen. And I spit. I mean, it was just, like I did a number on him. And the strange thing is that he just started laughing. And then I laughed too. I mean, it was just so incredibly comical. Looking back on it is comical. It's horrifying to me.
Well, I think even more recently, a lot of conservatives who've been invited by conservative clubs to speak on some campuses have had that kind of ill treatment. And worse than that, they had to call in a lot of times the police are called to run them off campus.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's the thing. Spitting is it's an ancient way of showing disdain. Might have come from, I don't know, camels maybe. Don't they spit? So maybe it's kind of. I mean, I don't mean to be racist or anything, but I mean,
Speciesist.
People are referred to as dogs, right? I mean, again, these are we see the connections to the animal world and the allusions to animals and animal behavior. So, of course, that if that's what camels do, you acting like a camel. People Gentiles referred to as dogs. I mean, you really want to be referred to. You want to be engaging in activities that animals do. But anyway, and again, that's why I'm trying to think. I'm playing devil's advocate. I'm thinking about what a person that is dubious to begin with, and you say, hey, the Bible said that Jesus is going to get spit on, and there's just no way, no how that anybody could have said that Jesus is going to get mistreated and spit on. That's just like mind-blowingly. I don't think so. I think people would make the argument that, well, I mean, maybe if they were specific in a certain way of spitting, or a certain person named Sam spit on him, that kind of thing. But just it's kind of a little bit generic in my opinion. But
I agree with you. But when I agree with you about things like that, I don't mean to be overly critical for what the brothers do. And I want to remind us all, there are a number of really profound Old Testament prophecies that are as detailed as you were talking about. Names are given, such specificity they rule out just guesswork. Isaiah 53 comes to mind readily, and the whole book of Daniel, basically. So those prophecies are there. I just kind of wish we should spend more time on those in more detail. But
and that's kind of what I guess I was going to get to, is that I kind of wish that some of these verses over here that are just zipped through, we could have spent a little more time on those, because I think some of those are more striking, no pun intended, than this one where it says that they're going to strike him. But let's see. Matthew records that at Jesus' trial before the Jewish high priest, unnamed individuals, quote, spat in his face and beat him, and others struck him. Let's see, I think I've got that on the board here. Uh-oh. This always happens. I don't have it queued up properly right now. Okay, so Matthew 26:67. They spat in his face, beat him, and others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, "Prophesy to us, Christ, who is the one who struck you?" Matthew 26:67, and then Mark 14:65. Some began to spit on him and to cover his face and to buffet him and to say unto him, "Prophesy," and the servants did strike him with the palms of their hands. Some hours later, under the authority of the Roman procurator Pontius Pilate, or procurator, soldiers took Jesus into the praetorium, where the entire garrison of soldiers subjected him to numerous indignities, including being stripped of clothing, having the crown of thorns pressed down upon his head, and being mercilessly mocked. Then, this is Matthew 27:30, then they spat on him and took the reed and struck him on the head. Also Mark 15 and 19.
Was that correct? Out of the King James? And they spit upon him?
And they spit upon him and
Is that
took the
supposed
reed.
to be present tense?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that he's quoting like the American Standard. Let's see.
That's what the American Standard says.
Spat.
Spit. English Standard, sorry.
English Standard says spit.
Well, in other words, so it's
They
like
spit on
present
him
tense,
for
like,
different reasons.
and now they spit upon him, or is that the idea? Or am I just forgetting my grammar?
Let me look at.
Maybe in 1611 that was acceptable for.
I am pretty sure that he quotes from the.
Yeah, that would work.
And they
grammatically.
spit upon him. Let me pull up the American Standard Version. $7.30. Yeah, the American Standard Version says, and they spat upon him and took the reed and smote him on the head. So spit or spat. I think it's. I would assume that it's the same. Past tense, but I don't know. Well, I guess I could look at I could pull up the.
Well, I don't know, Chris. Back in 1611 when that was translated, that might have been the aorist or the simple past tense for the verb spit, but now it's not, is it? If I remember, spit is present tense, isn't it? And spat would be past tense.
Let's see, emptio, to spit at or on, and I mean that is now is the
it present or is it aorist?
is the O.
That sounds like it'd be aorist, the ending.
To spit upon. I can look up other instances of it.
Aorist means past tense, of course. I think that's past tense.
Then did they spit in his face, and they spit upon him, and shall spit upon him. Some began to spit on him, and spitted
I didn't
on.
mean to get hung up on that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Sorry.
No, but I'm not sure if it means current progressive or if it's past perfect or whatever. But we do know that did happen, at least at that point. They did for sure, because they took the reed and struck him on the head and smote him on the head. That looks past tense.
Yeah.
So, and then we have the companion verse there, Mark 15, I believe. They smote him on the head with a reed and did spit.
Yeah.
Did
That's
spit.
what Rhonda was talking about. The
So-
new transformation, I guess, makes it work.
Yeah. All right. So. There we go. Incredibly, even Jesus even predicted his mistreatment, including the spitting before it happened. Mark 10:34 and Luke 18:32. Mark 10:34. And they shall mock him, and shall scourge him, and shall spit upon him, and shall kill him, and the third day he shall rise again. And in Luke 18:32, for he shall be delivered unto the Gentiles, and shall be mocked, and spitefully entreated, and spitted on. That's like the third version of that phrase. I would say, to me, of all of that, I mean, I think the kill him and the rise again, that's probably even more impactful. The scourging, the mocking and the spitting, that happened to a lot of people. Although the scourging maybe not so much, but definitely mocking and the
I
spitting.
guess we could say, though, It's a whole cumulative argument.
Yeah.
If you look at all of the details of the last week, I mean, the possibility of happening to one individual becomes increasingly less with
Mhm.
each detail that's added. But not any one detail by itself wouldn't be so unusual.
Oh, sure. I think the scourging to me is one of that's maybe one of the more important. Of course, he's going to go into that in more detail. But
Do you happen to, I don't recall, is there a reference in the Gospels to their plucking out his beard in the Gospels?
plucking the beard.
Yeah, because remember that was part of
Mhm.
the prophecy that he quoted a while ago.
Yeah, let's see. I'll just look it up on the
Do you
fly
recall
here.
that? I don't remember that. I remember spitting and crown of thorns.
One of the verses we just did said something about.
Well, yeah, that was the Old Testament prediction. Remember? I was wondering if there's anything in the Gospels.
In the New Testament, I'm not aware of.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering about. That would make that more persuasive because that detail is just overlooked if it's not brought over in the New Testament, mentioned that his beard was plucked.
Mm-hmm. What was it? Pluck or plucked or plucking? I see the word. Let's see, pluck. There are 17 occurrences of just the word pluck. It says.
This is one of those. What was one of the prophecies?
It was Isaiah 50, verse 6.
Isaiah 50, verse 6. Let's check that out.
It says pluck. And the
Pluck
pluck.
out the beard.
Yeah,
The English Standard says pull out the beard.
yeah.
So,
I was just wondering if any detail in the Gospels corresponds to that. If I just don't recall.
that's pretty specific. It's more
Yeah.
specific than spitting
Well,
on
spitting
someone.
is
The
in the
generic pulling on a beard is
Yeah, it's in the
specific.
same-
Not everybody had a beard. Like
It's in the same context. You'd think that would have to also be fulfilled to make it, that persuasive apologetic argument he's looking at. And I'm not knocking what he's trying to do. I know it's there are a lot of passages you can't use them all, but a lot you could choose.
The word beard does not occur in the New Testament apparently, which that seems weird. The word pluck is in the New
Is
Testament.
the word mustache in it? I'm just kidding.
Hair. Let's check for hair. I mean, how odd would that be? The word beard is not maybe bearded, but I think it would search for. So hair is in the Old and the New. Let's see if hair and pluck are.
If we had time, we could read all the gospel accounts of the trial and the abuse of Jesus when they were spitting on him, crowning him with the crown of thorns. But that would have been the time I would think that the plucking of the beard would have to take place.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. That's a good question, but the word beard. Let me see, bearded maybe.
Now the
No,
pictures we
beard.
see of Jesus as blue-eyed Northern European, I don't remember. They don't all have a beard. Many do, but not all do.
Yeah.
Most I think do.
Well, I don't know. We'll have to do a little more research on that because I don't see it right off. The beard, the word beard, just isn't in the New Testament. What's another word for beard? I mean, facial hair, but it wouldn't be. The word hair does appear, but not the words pluck and hair. Maybe pull and hair. Plaiting of the hair or
Rhonda
plaiting.
should remember that. She grew up Sunday school.
Broided hair.
If it's there.
A woman
Do
have
you
long
recall
hair.
that where they pulled his beard while they were mocking him? I don't recall it. I'm just thinking that should be a part of the prophecy that was quoted a while ago. Should be fulfilled too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that kind of stuck out to me because even the word hair, I mean, hair does not appear in the context of facial hair. It's long hair, braided hair, plaited hair. So, I don't know. That'd be interesting. You should put one of your students on that.
Yeah.
So he asked the question, how could a man writing 700 years earlier predict something as minute as one person spitting on another. Well, again, you might could argue with that.
Was it just one person?
One person spitting, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Messiah's going to come and people are going to spit on him. I mean, that's it just doesn't have the kind of specificity. Now, taken in conjunction, as Philip points out,
This was a group. This was not just one. This was a group of spitting. Unnamed individuals, he said.
Yeah. As minute as one person spitting on another. Well, these are groups of individuals spitting on another. Keep in mind the two separate occurrences, one before the Jewish high priest and the other before the Romans, were committed by perpetrators who were not the least bit interested in fulfilling prophecy. Well, again. To predict hundreds of years in advance that someone would spit on Jesus is proof of Bible inspiration. Isaiah and the rest of the writers, well, again, I mean, it's not the final proof. It's not the overwhelming proof. I mean, it is a proof, I suppose. Isaiah and the rest of the writers of the Bible demonstrate they functioned under the superhuman overruling power and influence of the Holy Spirit. Indeed, they were guided by the God of the universe. And again, that's just such a... I mean, that statement, saying to back up that one claim, I think it's a little overkill. I think it's just... But anyway, we've made that point. We're not going to keep making
claim
it.
by itself, it's not as persuasive. But if you put together all the details of the last week of Jesus' life,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's part of the cumulative case. It's just, you wouldn't put too much weight upon it by itself, it might break. But if you put all the little sticks underneath, it'll hold up all the weight,
Have you? And I know maybe it's inappropriate, but you've probably seen the movie Ghostbusters. I mean, you've been around long enough. You've caught it in one form or another. There's a scene where they're looking at the library, and there's a stack of books, and I think one of the guys is talking about, wow, can you look at this stack of books and the way that it's stacked, and you're just really obsessing about it. And then Bill Murray's character says, yes, you're right, no human being would stack books like this. I think about that, and again, you have to look at the big picture, and not get caught up in these minute details. It might excite, the person that's, very heavily steeped in the Bible and understanding of the history and the prophecies. And you're talking to a layman and you say, "Oh, this prophecy says that Jesus is going to get spit on," and that's just ironclad proof that the God of heaven, the Creator of all, inspired this. And again, I'm not saying that's the only thing he's saying. I mean, it's just one of. But again, to kind of put the punctuation mark on that section, just kind of. I'm not trying to be, like you say, being overly critical, but again, just gotta pick our battles and gotta know.
Years ago, I used to try to teach Christian evidences to certain congregations where I was laboring, and I'd get a little bit of resistance,
Mm-hmm.
and often some members would come up and say, apologetics, the defense of the faith, is not necessary for believers.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's no reason for you to bring that up for us. Why would you try to do that? And I tried to tell them, well, I'm hoping all of us our own faith can be strengthened. We can be reminded of what we've learned,
Mm-hmm.
but we can gather material we can use if we have conversations with unbelievers. Hopefully we can have that readily at hand if we cover this a lot and we're familiar with it. So I didn't always persuade the people that were naysayers about it, but I think we need to do more apologetics in our Bible classes like you're doing. And we need to do it well. We need to do it well. It's got to be the best apologetic. Not just anything we'll do. And so I appreciate your being evaluating. Let's say evaluating carefully.
The other thing too, and I say this, when he makes that statement, it's kind of an over the top statement, but like this one thing, this. As he's focusing on the spitting aspect of that little minute detail, and he ends it up with, to predict hundreds of years in advance that someone would spit on Jesus is proof of Bible inspiration. Well, again, when you overemphasize something like this that really, I think, would be something that really wouldn't convince someone. I think if you're making this argument and you're saying how ironclad, over the top, you're making this statement, then to someone that really is, trying to come up with good arguments for their friends, for loved ones, and like, is this the best you got? I mean, you see what I'm saying? I mean, it's kind of deflating to me to read this and to think that, well, sure, I take it seriously. I'm not, rejecting it, or I'm not, just dismissing it completely. But like, if that's the best argument and you're making this over the top, putting that exclamation mark at the end of this argument, I just don't see that that's the best argument. And if this is one of the best arguments, then maybe we're in trouble when it comes to apologetics. That's all I'm saying.
You're right. If this were the best or one of the best,
and it's
but
not.
We're not. There are much better arguments.
And it's not. I'm just saying, to the person that's reading this book, and maybe this might kind of make them nervous. Like, ooh, like, this isn't getting better. I mean, like, you come off of the two Bethlehems, and that's a pretty good argument. And then you get to the spitting argument, and it's kind of like, ooh, was the Bethlehem's the best one then? Because this is kind of, it's getting a little weaker. Not that you couldn't have a bunch of little things that add up to a big thing, but
unless I read it wrong, you just quoted from what he said. He said, for someone to know hundreds of years earlier that an individual was spit upon Jesus. Now he's identified a particular individual already.
Mm-hmm.
He's assuming we already accept the fact that prophecy refers to Jesus.
Yeah.
Well, we believe it does. But you can't just beg the question, that's the proper sense of that term, or prove the very point that, or assume the very point that has to be proven. The very point that's at issue is whether that prophecy refers to Jesus or to someone else. Does Jesus of Nazareth fit the bill, or would it refer to somebody else? And if you can say nobody in history was ever spat upon but Jesus, you can make that case. But since it happens so often, it's not quite as persuasive. Although it's one factor among several.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Yeah, that's the perfect way to put it. So anyway, we'll move on to the next chapter here. But anyway, like I said, I hate saying stuff like that. But when I read that, I personally felt that way. I personally felt like, I hope it gets better, and it does. It's just.
Well, you're the teacher. You got to make it better.
Yeah. Well, we'll make it better by moving on. How about that? Shaking of the head. Well, okay. Maybe not better too much, too fast. Living at the beginning of the 21st century, who could possibly provide very detailed, very specific information about the execution of an individual in another country and culture 1,000 years into the future? Such ability is beyond human capability, yet the Bible portrays just this quality, thereby demonstrating its divine origin. Again, it doesn't help for him to build up like this. This is just like, oh wow, you're waiting with bated breath, and then people were shaking their heads and pursing their lips, making the duck face. That's, I don't know. For example, in a clearly messianic psalm, King David quoted the Messiah as saying, "All those who see me ridicule me. They shoot out the lip, they shake the head, saying, he trusted in the Lord. Let him rescue him. Let him deliver him, since he delights in him." Did we talk about this? I think we did talk about this.
I think we did.
Maybe I skipped the spitting part, or maybe I went over it very, very rapidly. So again, I don't know. This is very much analogous, I think, to the spitting argument. In another psalm, a similar allusion is made. I also have become a reproach to them. When they look at me, they shake their heads. Psalm 109:25. The individual or individuals who wrote these statements had been dead for centuries when Jesus came to the earth and fulfilled their predictions. Historical fact verifies that the Psalms were complete centuries prior to the 1st century A.D., and the actions that were fulfilled were not fulfilled by sympathetic persons, but were in fact fulfilled unwittingly by hostile enemies of the Messiah. Consider Matthew's account of what happened at the cross. I think I might have that queued up. No, I don't. That's okay. Those who passed by blasphemed him, wagging their heads and saying, "You who destroyed the temple and build it in 3 days, save yourself. If you're the Son of God, come down from the cross." Likewise, the chief priests also, mocking with the scribes and elders, said, "He saved others, he cannot save himself. If he is the King of Israel, let him now come down off the cross and we'll believe him. He trusted in God, let him deliver him now." And that's an interesting point. You could probably make a good sermon about that. Oh, we'll believe him if he comes down off the cross. We didn't believe all those other miracles he did. We don't believe all that other stuff. But yeah, if he'll do something else, if he'll just do one more thing. I mean, where have you heard that stuff before? That happens all the time. Well, sure, I saw you do that, but, what else can you do? What's the next thing?
They have Moses and the prophets. Yeah, but if somebody would come back from the dead.
Exactly. Even the robbers who were crucified with him reviled him with the same thing. Okay, it's page 45. How in the world could anyone predict that those who attended the crucifixion would shake their heads at Jesus? Lucky guess? When viewed along with a multitude of other details, that's the key part here.
I was going to say that, underline that, and if you put it all together, it does begin to reduce the possibilities as to who it would fit.
Mm-hmm.
But just any one by itself might not be persuasive.
Yeah. So, if he'd have taken all these things, put them together, and then at the end said, how could, any human being pinpoint all of these specific details? But when you take them apart and you take them apart one by one, it loses the impact. So if you're going to do this, if you're talking to somebody and want to make that argument, then I would just put it all together. The wagging of the head, the spitting, and the reviling, and all that.
And plucking the beard.
The plucking of the beard hairs. Jesus' body prepared. So, page 45 again. Another incredible prophecy was recalled by the writer of the book of Hebrews, in which he quotes from Psalm 40. He places the words in the mouth of Jesus, applying the prediction to Jesus' incarnation and sacrifice on the cross. His citation is taken from the Septuagint version rather than the original Hebrew. So this is Hebrews 10, 5 through 7. Therefore, when he came into the world, he said, "Sacrifice and offering you did not desire, but a body you have prepared for me. In burnt offerings and sacrifices for sin you had no pleasure. Then I said, Behold, I have come. In the volume of the book it is written of me, to do your will, O God. Behold, I have come to do your will." All right, so the Bible teaches that deity came to earth in human flesh in order to offer himself as an atonement for the sins of the human race. Galatians 2, verse 20. "I am crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me, and the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me." 1 Timothy 2 and 6. "Who gave himself a ransom for all, to be testified in due time." Titus 2:14. "Who gave himself for us, that he might redeem us from all iniquity, and purify unto himself a peculiar people, zealous of good works." And of course, there's etc., etc. The book of Hebrews was written in the 1st century A.D., but the Psalms were written several hundred years before that, with Psalm 40 written presumably by David 1,000 years earlier. That means that 1,000 years separates the prediction from the fulfillment. Even the most liberal treatment of the Psalms places their composition prior to the 1st century A.D. As previously noted, the Greek Bible is generally believed to have been completed in the 3rd century B.C., which means the Psalms had to have been completed prior to that time. But how detailed was this prediction? Did it contain vague generalities and ambiguous phrases that can be bent to refer to just about anything? By no means. Among the details of the prediction, observe that the passage represents God, the Father, as being responsible for preparing or providing a body for Jesus, the Son, to inhabit. This body would replace the animal sacrifices and offerings contained in the Old Testament economy for dealing with sin. Such predictions are hardly vague or ambiguous. In fact, they are extremely specific and intricate. And I would agree with that. That's not something that a human mind came up with, that idea. One of the great marvels of the Christian religion is the virgin conception by which Mary was impregnated by the Holy Spirit, enabling her to conceive a child. Matthew 1:18 through 25. And of course, I throw that up on the screen, but we've read this many times. Behold, a virgin shall be with child, and shall bring forth a son, and they shall call his name Emmanuel, which being interpreted is God with us. So we know that child was Jesus Christ, who vacated the heavenly realm temporarily to fulfill the magnificent, incomprehensible purpose of sacrificing himself for lost humanity. Philippians 2, verses 6 through 8. Who, being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in fashion as a man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross. A physical fleshly body was necessary to accomplish this purpose, hence the need to be born of a woman. Galatians 4 and verse 4, when the fullness of time was come, God sent forth his Son, made of a woman, made under the law. Genesis 3:15, of course, the prediction, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed, and it shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. Hence the need to be born of a woman by which deity could inhabit a human body. Observe that the physical body was genetically derived from David via his descendant Mary. Luke 3, verses 23 and 31. Jesus himself began to be about 30 years of age, being, as was supposed, the son of Joseph, who was the son of Heli, which was the son of Maliah, which was the son of Manan, which was the son of Mattatha, which was the son of Nathan, which was the son of David. Of course, there's a lot of stuff in between those verses, but we'll skip that. Romans 1 and 3. Concerning his Son, Jesus Christ our Lord, which was made of the seed of David according to the flesh. So, his physical body was genetically derived from David via his descendant Mary in fulfillment of another predictive prophecy, 1 Samuel 7, verse 12. Then Samuel took a stone and set it between Mizpah and Shen, and called the name of it Ebenezer, saying, Hitherto hath the Lord helped us. But Jesus himself is not to be confused with his physical body. Jesus himself preceded the preparation and formation of the physical body that he inhabited. And that's an important point to note as well, because if you don't recognize that, then you could fall into the trap of believing, like some denominations do, that Jesus was created by God, that he's a created being and not part of the Godhead. So I think that's an important point to reiterate. Jesus himself preceded the preparation and formation of the physical body that he inhabited in first century Palestine. Jesus himself has always existed since he is deity and eternal. Colossians 1:16, for by him were all things created, there in heaven and there in earth, visible and invisible, whether it be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. Chapter 2 and verse 9, for in him dwelleth the fullness of the Godhead bodily. So again, referring to Jesus. Jesus himself participated in the creation of the universe. We read about that in John 1, verses 1 through 3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. Colossians 1:17. And he is before all things, and by him all things consist. How in the world can any mere human have predicted hundreds of years in advance that a person would be born who, unlike all other humans ever born, was in fact God inhabiting a physical body? No mere human could have predicted such an event. Hence we are at once again struck by the fact the Bible bears the attributes of a supernatural origin. So what do we think of that particular argument. Is that better? Is it better than the split argument?
If you accept that Jesus is God incarnate, well, if you already accept that, then would you really have to go back to the Old Testament to be persuaded that He's God incarnate from that prophecy? If you already accept it, you'd have to already accept that premise. You could accept that premise, and I would say it could be the conclusion of arguments. It could be based on other factors. For example, you could do an historical study of the empty tomb. You could do a strictly historical study, not yet looking at the question of inspiration or whether the Holy Spirit was behind it, but strictly from the standpoint of the history that's involved, history even that's recorded in New Testament documents, because they do exist. Whatever you think of their origin, they're there, and they're ancient, and they have a really good pedigree to show that they're authentic. So you can take the history and establish that Jesus, in fact, lived, of course, that He was crucified by the Romans, Pontius Pilate. So all that history is borne out by secular sources, even outside of Scripture. It's supported by it. And then on the third day, the tomb was empty. And then you can make a really good case that it wouldn't. It's not logical to assume the body was stolen or taken by either the Jews or the disciples. You can go through all the reasons why. You covered that in other studies a lot, so I won't go into all that. So once you've done that, the empty tomb speaks loud on behalf of the resurrection. And you have other things. As I mentioned Sunday, you have the fact Jews suddenly converted from Sabbath day keeping after generations to Sunday worship, which makes sense if that's the day the Lord arose on, as is mentioned in the record. There are various things like that. The very existence of the early church speaks eloquently to the fact that He was raised from the dead. Now, if you can go to the self-claims that are made by Jesus, He claimed to be deity. And He claimed to perform miracles to attest to His being deity. And then you can show that He actually was raised from the dead. That would be supreme confirmation of His claims. So you could show from that standpoint that yes, Christ is divine without having to go into the Old Testament Scripture. But that's another route to do it. That's another way of doing it. But you can't assume the point that has to be proven already. You've got to prove it in the proper logical order. That's what I insist. The steps have to be followed.
It's kind of a chicken and egg thing, you know. You can't prove that the Scriptures are prophecy if you're assuming that Jesus is a fulfillment of those prophecies without, you know, any other kind of proof. I mean, you can't use the Bible to prove that Jesus is the Son of God and then use the fact that Jesus is the Son of God to prove that the Bible is real and from God. You know what I'm saying? Because you have to, unless you can come to that conclusion through, you know, other inferences or through things that are provable outside the realm of the pages of the Bible, then I think that you're going to have a hard time convincing a lot of people. You know, again, I would not take someone who said, and I have a lot of experience with this. I would not take someone saying, "Well, I know it's true because I read it, or I saw it, or I heard it, or so and so said it's true." Okay, well, how does so and so know? So and so does a lot of research. So and so knows, and you're taking somebody else's word for something. This is what most denominational people do when they go to church: is they listen to the preacher. The preacher tells them, you know, what he believes, what their denomination teaches, and then that's the end of it. You know, they don't really go any further than that. They don't search the Scriptures to see whether those things are true or not, as they should. But we're different than that. I mean, I don't know. I don't know a lot of members of the church that don't look for. Of course,
Well, we should be.
I know them casually. Some maybe I know some people casually that don't. But most of the people I hang out with, you know, we talk about it, and you know, we check each other. You know, and it's part of this. I guess my philosophy, or you know, I like to be right about what I believe. You know, I don't want to be mistaken about something, regardless of whether it's religious or, you know, something technical. I don't want to be wrong. I want to be leading people astray. So that requires study. But again, I fall into that same camp, I would say, as the people that we're talking to, trying to convert. That I want to study more about this so that I can continue to reaffirm my own belief in the Bible, because we're being constantly torn down. I mean, our faith is constantly being picked at and chipped away at. So it's a constant patching effort, if you will, in my opinion. Now, maybe that sounds terrible, but the world chips away, and we've got to continue to shore up where it's been chipped away, where the termites and the rot have set in.
Well, don't get me wrong about the fact that there is a legitimate approach to demonstrating that a particular person in history, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Joseph, son of Mary, to showing that that particular individual who lived 2,000 years ago is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecy. There is a very legitimate approach. That was the apostolic approach by and large. I mean, they did say things like Paul said, I did see him. He was an eyewitness. So he used that as part of the attestation that he accepted that Jesus is divine because I saw it. But that's not his only way. When he'd go to the synagogue, what he would do, he'd take the scriptures, and of course, his Jewish interlocutors would all say, well, we accept those scriptures. You know, they already did. He's not trying to prove the inspiration of the scripture. That was something they held in common. He was saying, these scriptures make predictions that there will be a Messiah. Okay, they said, well, duh. But the Messiah's not as we used to think. He would point out, these scriptures show the Messiah won't be coming as a conquering hero like David with a literal army. He's going to come, and he's going to come and be a man of peace. He's going to be a man of sorrows, you know, Isaiah 53. He's going to be kind of, you know, the reversal of roles from what we thought he would be. He's going to be a very meek and lowly individual. In fact, he will end up suffering. In fact, he will end up being killed by his own countrymen. And he would go and he would prove that it is in the Old Testament. It does predict it, but they had just conveniently ignored that. So he would show them that, and then he would give the details about how these are the things that would happen to the Messiah. This is what it really says will happen to the Messiah, and when he will come. For example, you could narrow the time he's going to come in the days of the Roman kings in Daniel 2. And then you can go back and say, now, there is an individual who fits the bill on every count, not just a few, on every point, and that's Jesus of Nazareth. So you can go through every one of those prophecies and say, this is the only person. Some people fit some of the minor aspects, but none fit them all as this man did. And that's the argument he would make, and that was a very powerful argument. When you had a willing audience who would spend hours and weeks and months going through those big, unwieldy scrolls and going through, they didn't have chapters and verses, but they would find it. Send there somewhere, here it is, and they'd read it. And then they would say, and this is what happened to Jesus. And then he'd have reason he could back that up by historical memory, by what eyewitnesses said about what Jesus did and taught in his lifetime and so on. So anyway, biblical prophecy is the apostolic approach. You know, on the day of Pentecost, you know, David said, you will not allow me to see corruption, but David is a rotten corpse right here, you know?
Yeah. So
obviously he was referring to the Messiah. Well, that fits the prediction here. He's going to be rising from the dead on the third day.
That's very well put. The only thing that I would say is that we are talking about two separate audiences, because, as you said, that was an audience of believers.
Yeah.
They believed that the Bible was from God.
Yeah.
They already believed this point. So, you know, this book is called The Bible is from God, a sampling of proofs that the Bible is from God, not proofs that Jesus is the Messiah that was promised. I mean, this book is supposed
Good
to...
observation. That's a good point.
It's supposed to prove to the person reading it that the Bible did come from God by pointing out the proofs, which the particular chapter we're in are the prophecies. So this is supposed to be proof. This is supposed to be proof not just to me, but to anybody, right? I'm assuming that there's not a caveat here. There's not a parenthesis for believers, for people that believe already. You know,
Well, that's not really apologetics. That's
yeah,
the Bible.
exactly. So, again, when the apostles did that, they were talking to an audience that already, they were there on the day of Pentecost. I mean, they were religious Jews anyway, right? So they believed it, and they knew, hopefully, at least some of the scriptures, and then he could say that Jesus is the fulfillment of that. Now today, you're talking to somebody that's just a complete atheist or agnostic. You don't even have that commonality, so you can't just make that argument. You've got to make the argument that here is the Old Testament prophecy, here's where it came true, and here is how we know that these two things are factual from the historical record,
I know this is slightly controversial. It's not in a big way controversial, but there are a few who disagree with me. But my point of view has been for a long time, you really can't take Old Testament prophecies by themselves, standing alone,
Yeah.
to prove to an atheist the existence of God. For that very reason, you have to first demonstrate the existence of God. Once you've convinced him to leave atheism and become a theist, where he knows that miracles are a possibility, they are not a possibility in the atheist worldview.
Mm-hmm.
And it's consistent with his worldview. Miracles cannot happen given the naturalistic point of view. But once you've established that deity exists, that there's a transcendent realm beyond the universe, miracles are a possibility, then you can go, instead of going right making a beeline to the prophecies, you could do that. But I would prefer to do it I think Paul would do it like in Athens. He went to a bunch of philosophers who didn't have a Greek background, a Jewish background, they're Greeks.
Mm-hmm.
So they accepted philosophy. He appealed to their philosophers. Even one of their own poets had said, in him we live and move and have our being. There's some unknown God out there. He said, well, you're right about that, and he's the one you've been ignoring all along. It's the true God.
Mm-hmm.
So that was a brilliant move on his part. You seem to instinctively already know that. And when he went to Antioch of Pisidia, Antioch of Pisidia, he went in and convinced those pagans there who they were idolaters. They tried to offer sacrifices to Paul and Barnabas as though they were some kind of God. He said he left not himself without witness in that he did good and gave us rains from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our hearts with food and gladness. That's a simple farmer's argument for the fact this is an orderly world that provides for our needs. It's kind of an incipient design argument for the existence of God.
Mm-hmm.
So Paul would deal with those sorts of things. He even says in Romans 1 that the pagans are without excuse because that which may be known of God is clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even as the eternal power of God is, so that they're without excuse. So arguments can be made for the existence of God apart from Scripture alone. Of course, then you can go back and you can show what philosophy you could say or science demonstrates about God perfectly coincides with the Mosaic account of Genesis. In the beginning, God. It just fits that very being is described that's found even by the philosophers, and the scientists.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to first show God exists, and you have to strip away their false worldview of atheism. Once miracles become a possibility, then you can look at the resurrection, and the resurrection attests to Jesus' credibility as a spokesman from God. And Jesus attested the Old Testament as the Word of God. And Jesus said there will be a New Testament written, and he showed how. So Jesus' arm stretched to the history past to show the Old Testament's God's Word, and to history forward, to history to come, to show the New Testament will be God's Word. Jesus is the centerpiece of all earth history, and even of our apology, at least my apologetic, the way I would do it.
Yeah, that's a great point. You say that they don't believe in miracles. Other than the Big Bang and abiogenesis.
They really do. They
the
just
two
don't admit it,
miracles.
yeah.
The two miracles that they kind of try and wedge into a scientific framework. But yeah, it definitely is. It's definitely a challenge. What was I gonna say? I can't remember. I was going. Yeah, about the persuasion. You said that about making these arguments, and that's what in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 11. Knowing therefore the terror of the Lord, we persuade men. Right, and I was thinking, what does that mean, persuade? But when you look it up, to convince by argument, by analogy, reflexively or passively. So we convince or use analogies, I guess. But that's the thing is, does convince mean to prove? That's another question. It's like, I guess maybe think of it like a jury, in a courtroom. That's we're innocent until proven guilty. But you can be innocent because you have doubt. If there's not, what is the phrase? Reasonable doubt. You have reasonable doubt. See, and you would think that people might, if you can persuade them to the point where they have a reasonable doubt about their atheism, at least that's a wedge in there that you could build upon. So, is it possible to prove? I don't know that it's possible
I
to.
think so.
Well,
It depends on what you mean by proof, the nature of the proof.
yeah.
It's not direct eyesight, of course, empirical, but these are inferences that can be drawn from empirical.
Well, that's what I mean. You
And I
can't.
believe proof is the proper term.
You can't prove in the sense of pointing to, like with the telescope. I can see heaven from here.
Right.
Not that kind of proof, but there's a persuasion, there's a preponderance of evidence that can move people into that direction. Anyway, I think, but people are looking for it's like the Jews, come off that cross, and then we'll believe.
But now remember, in the book of John, the whole Gospel of John, the burden of that book is to say many other signs truly did Jesus in the presence of his disciples, which are not written in this book. But these are written that you might believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believe you might have life through his name. John 20, 30, and 31.
Mm-hmm.
So John's book is an apologetic book. He sets forth a historical record of miracles performed by Jesus. The signs, in fact, in the context of John, those signs, the Greek semeion, those signs are miraculous signs. And in John 14, I believe it's 11 and 12, I think, Jesus said, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me, the NIV says, on the basis of the miracles themselves.
Mm-hmm.
In other words, this is evidence. And it was confirmed. The word was confirmed. Hebrews 2, 1-3 says, the word that was preached by the apostles was confirmed unto us by them that heard him, God bearing witness with them with signs and miracles and divers wonders and gifts of the Holy Ghost according, to his own will. Mm-hmm. So what we have are these different evidences that are set forth as confirmation. So arose by any other name, I would say it's discursive proof, it's discursive reasoning. It is an empirical test tube type, litmus paper type proof, but it is still proof, and it's still valid, and it would hold weight in a debate, a philosophical debate.
And what's interesting, when you put it that way, it reminds me of what is the term that typically your evolutionists would say, is written in the fossil record.
Yeah.
That is not any different, I don't think, than the kind of proof, because they're misunderstanding, I think, what they're reading. But they don't have direct proof. I mean, there is no direct proof. You can't see evolution happening. You can
Actually,
see.
what's written in the fossil record.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
It actually
That's
but,
true.
But you're exactly right on that.
About it.
In principle, they're making the same kind of inferential argument we are.
They make the
can't
same
always-
inferential. It's just that they misunderstand.
Exactly.
And there are people that read the Gospels, they read the Bible, and they understand it incorrectly, and so they come to the wrong conclusions. And the one thing that they all have in common is that they come with an axe to grind. They come with a prejudice in their head. The evolutionist comes with the prejudice that God doesn't exist, that these animals had to have come about through natural processes. Again, it's.
I was helping Ava, my granddaughter, with a homework today.
Mhm.
I wasn't cheating. I was just helping her. And she was reading some science material, and on page 16 of one of her handouts, there was a whole section about cladograms and, the cladistics, it's a new way of taxonomy, how you classify, it's the more trendy way of how you classify, living forms.
Uh-huh.
Anyway, I'm not going to go into cladograms, junk. But what disturbed me was to see all the evolution that was crammed in there. I said, Ava, this is teaching outright evolution. She said, well, my teacher said we haven't gotten to that yet. We'll get to that later. I said, well, it came earlier in your book, your handout. So then I gave her a long lesson. Of course I would. And I told her, I said, let me make it simple for you. These people hate God and they hate righteousness. But you ask them, how did we get here then if there is no God? They've got to give an explanation. Well, it just happened. I said, so the wish was already there, the motive, to rule God out of the picture so they could live like they wanted, like the devil, basically. So they had to come up with an ad hoc explanation, which is Darwinian evolution, or any kind of evolution, going back to the Greeks. The Greeks had evolution.
Exactly. And the sad thing is they know it's a lie. I mean, they openly say that it's just not possible for evolution to happen the way that we have always taught it. And they say that the books are wrong, and yet it's a convenient lie, and they let it stand.
Oh,
right?
Yeah, you're exactly right when it comes to some of the bogus evidence, like Haeckel's drawings of embryos that are supposed to be recapitulate, I taught you it recapitulates phylogeny junk. Outright blatant lies. He lied with his diagrams. And even at the time he did it, embryologists said, that's not what those forms look like in those early stages. Yeah, but it made the point. And it still makes the point, so it's useful. It's a useful lie.
And scientists do this. All scientists do this. And you can see that recently with Dr. Birx when she talks about the fact that they knew that the shots didn't work. And yet, and the mask didn't work. They all knew all this stuff, right? And yet they let it go because it was convenient to have something. We got to have something for the people to not panic. We got to have some answer for them. And so this is the it's just the same way with evolution. We've got to have some answer for people because we can't have God being the one in control. We can't have God in the picture. We can't let people.
And why not? Why not God? I mean, ask why human beings would not want God to be in the picture.
Well, because they want the power. They want to be God. They want to be the science. I am the science.
Yes.
I am the God. I mean, that's what that's shorthand for.
Yeah. Well, you're making fun of it with good reason because the NIH is one of the big culprits who has withheld funding from any researcher over the last several decades who's attempted to make any kind of critique of Darwinism at all. If they come up with any scientific evidence saying, we might need to rethink this one detail of Darwinism, the NIH will not give them funding, won't give them grants.
Mm-hmm.
But if you toe the line with Darwinism, you get all the grants you want from Fauci and gang, all those people.
Sure.
I mean, science has been politicized for decades. It's not recent. We just have seen it lately.
We just have had our eyes opened
Yeah.
more broadly. But yeah, climate change,
Exactly.
all of these things, these are all heavily politicized. And there is no open discourse. There's no back and forth. There's no critiques of any of this. It's just, well, this is the way it is until overwhelming evidence, overwhelming force causes it to change. The science has changed. That's a popular saying lately. So, again, it's frustrating to have all that taught, especially in the public school system. When they could just as easily. Well, here's one way it could have happened. Here's what but they don't frame it like that. It's always evolution. This is what happened. And then you just work out the details on your own of of God not being in the picture.
Science as a method is a beautiful thing if it's done right. I mean, if people use the scientific method and they conscientiously try to be honest and set forth the hypothesis correctly and then pursue the real evidence and are willing to allow evidence to count against their theories, to falsify their theory. The method of science is good. But here's the problem. You use science with a lowercase letter, science, and then science with an uppercase. That's almost like the high priesthood. It's sort of like the New Testament church, the truth that came out of the first century, the New Testament church. A group of people who would search the scriptures daily to see if those things were so. But over time, corruption set into the church hierarchy. It developed a hierarchy. So you had the priesthood and you had the Roman hierarchy that would allow no dissent. And you'd be burned at the stake if you dissented. That's what science is turning into. It has its own priesthood today. The Faucis of the world, all the people who are in or ensconced with political clout. And those are the people who say, we're the science, But they're saying we're the science in the same way Roman Catholicism says we're Christianity.
Yeah, we're the church.
We're the church.
Back to what you were talking about, the scientific method. I don't have proof of this, but I have a real strong suspicion. They don't teach the actual scientific method much anymore. It's not even being taught, to go through the...
You're probably right.
They're not
They're-
teaching that anymore.
today, it has been so politicized, it's more about what do scientists think instead of how do we pursue, how do we need to ask these questions ourselves?
What do most scientists,
Yeah,
what is the,
That's all they do.
9 out of
Unless
10
they're
doctors,
They don't go
agree.
through that process anymore because it leads to truth, things they don't want.
9 out of 10 scientists agree because they get paid to agree.
Mhm.
I mean, that's
But she just
basically.
said it leads to truth, but that's an antiquated concept for many people today. The very idea of truth, objective truth out there to be discovered, that's an old paradigm. They said the new paradigm is there is no truth. We all subjectively manufacture. I'll manufacture my truth. For me, it's my fabricated truth. Yours is yours, and they may not be the same at all. So obviously you can explode that. You can blow it out of the water and show its utter inconsistency, how it's never consistent with itself, and they do have a hidden agenda. It's always based on Darwinism and naturalism. The hidden premise behind all of the postmodernists is Darwinism. And that's very so-called objective, though it's wrong. It's wrong, but it sets out to be objective in a way. But we go back, they say truth, in fact, many of them say truth itself is a theistic idea. It's a theological idea. It's supposed a universe where there's a maker of it all. But if there is no maker of it all, we can't even trust the synapse that takes place between our brain cells, the energy that we don't know what if an idea even corresponds to the world out there. Who wants to know? The professor asked it.
Life.
Who's asking that question?
Life is but a dream.
Yeah.
Yeah, it goes back to that. That's real popular now. All that gobbledygook.
And yet, when they go downstairs after they've given their brilliant lectures, they look both ways when they cross the street. I mean, they'll laugh at you when you bring it up, but you'll look both ways.
Yeah.
Because they're objective big trucks that will run over you. If you
Yeah,
move.
it's like all the liberalism. It's like all the modern liberalism, all of the different philosophies and things. When it comes down to it, they know that 1 + 1 = 2, and that you can't get around that. They like to pretend like it's not the case, and yet, well, anyway,
And when they argue all day long that language means nothing, that while they're actually eloquent, you can look at him and say, "Fly's undone." He'll look down every time, even though he may be lying.
well, but what's a lie? It corresponds to your truth. That was your truth, Philip. What's your song?
612.
612 is the song of invitation. Does anyone needs to respond? If you would let that be known while we sing.
I found my Lord and He is mine. He won